The president of Brazil and the president of China meet just days after the president of China met with the president of France. Just another example of Xi Jinping's vast global influence. Our Vice President Kamala Harris says that pro-life policies threaten American democracy, and former President Donald Trump gained significant support after his indictment. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know from Monday, April 17th, 2023. But just a quick reminder to please subscribe by pressing the button down below. And also be sure to check out my show Timeless on the playlist on this YouTube channel, where I talk about non-newsy, non-political, just fascinating, timeless, eternal subjects. Going on to this first news story, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, also known as Lula, of Brazil, and President Xi Jinping of China met in Beijing this past Friday after a few days of Lula visiting the country of China. China is Brazil's largest trading partner, and Brazil is the biggest economy in Latin America. It exported $88 billion to China in 2021. And the top exports were iron ore, which is a product used to make steel, soybeans, and crude petroleum. And in return, China exports manufactured items to Brazil and indeed to many countries around the world. So during this meeting, they deepened their economic and political ties. And Lula is specifically trying to re-deepen these ties with China after his predecessor, President Jair Bolsonaro, tried to distance the country from China. Lula said during this visit, quote, "China is an essential partner today for Brazil and for Latin America." Now, Lula, over the past few weeks, has cozied up to Xi Jinping, who back in February proposed a 12-point plan in which Xi Jinping wanted to bring peace to the war in Ukraine, but the United States and many European countries rejected this plan, of course, because it was too accommodating to Russia's interest. But Lula has endorsed this 12-point plan. And he said recently that President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is just as responsible for the war in Ukraine as Putin is. And he also noted that Crimea belongs to Russia. So you can see here that the president of Brazil is entreating to the Chinese, trying to gain favor among Xi Jinping, who in turn supports Russia. Just as a little bit of background on Lula, you remember earlier this year it made headlines all around the world. On January 8th, pro-Bolsonaro supporters stormed the Brazilian Supreme Court, the Congress, and the presidential palace, arguing that the recent election, where Lula defeated the former president Jair Bolsonaro, was stolen. Lula is a radical leftist. He actually founded the Sao Paulo Forum in the 1990s alongside Fidel Castro in order to reinvigorate communism in Latin America after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in 2007, during Lula's tenure as president, this is actually now his third time being the president of the country, he and his Workers' Party orchestrated what Mary O'Grady of the Wall Street Journal calls the biggest bribery scandal in the Western Hemisphere. Sao Paulo, Sean is correcting me. Thank you, Sean. Lots of people in business and government, including, of course, Lula, went to jail for padding contracts and getting kickbacks that robbed the public purse of billions of dollars. And Lula was convicted in 2017 for orchestrating this fraud and for money laundering. But in 2021, he was vacated by the Brazilian Supreme Court. Many of the justices on that court are quite favorable to Lula and his party. He was vacated on a technicality, though he was never exonerated. And then in 2022, in October, he defeated Bolsonaro and was inaugurated in early 2023, prompting those riots on January 8th. That was the closest election in Brazilian history, and many argue that it was stolen. In fact, there is a lot of evidence that the Supreme Court ordered search warrants for police raids on homes of people who criticized Lula, and otherwise Supreme Court members and members of the Electoral Tribunal, which oversees Brazilian elections, tried to influence the result by suppressing pro-Bolsonaro speech. So Lula and Xi Jinping signed over a dozen economic deals this past weekend with one another, both affirming their desire to bolster a greater role for China and Brazil in the global economic infrastructure. And specifically, this was a slight to the United States. Both leaders of both countries have affirmed that they want to make sure that the United States is no longer the global political and economic hegemon. In fact, Lula took aim at the global dominance of the United States dollar in the world economy by saying, quote, "Every night I ask myself why every country needs to trade in the dollar." This, of course, is reflecting Beijing's desire to boost the role of the Chinese yuan in trade. You know, I was looking at a photo this weekend of Lula and Xi Jinping meeting in Beijing, and I have to tell you, it was really frightening for me to see. Because over the past few months on this show, as many of you listeners know, I've been reporting on the many times that President Xi has met with leaders of countries from around the world. It's not just confined to one continent or one area of the globe, but indeed Xi Jinping is really making a world tour, or actually even more terrifying, a lot of leaders are flying to Beijing to be at his behest to make economic and political deals with China. I want to give you some examples of other leaders who Xi Jinping has met with in just the past few months. And I want you to think about, what photos have we seen of President Biden meeting with world leaders? Let's look at February of 2023 when Xi Jinping hosted the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. And in fact, they signed an economic deal in which China agreed to build a railway through the capital of Tehran, and industrialize the Ayatollah Khomeini International Airport in Iran. Another example, in March of 2023, China's top diplomat, this was not Xi Jinping, but again the top diplomat, Wang Yi, orchestrated a historic peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country, Iran is a Shia country. Historically, they have been enemies. They actually didn't have diplomatic relations for several years, but no longer, thanks to China, they have established diplomatic and economic ties, aligning themselves more with China and with Russia. Also in March of 2023, Xi Jinping went to Moscow to meet with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. They called each other dear friends, and they affirmed that they would pursue, quote, "a friendship without limits." China has bought more Russian oil and natural gas and boosted shipments of electronics, chips, and other goods amid Western sanctions that started in February of 2022 when Putin invaded Ukraine. Russia and China has also said that their alliance is a good counterweight to U.S. hegemony. Are you noticing a pattern here among countries that are meeting with China? They're wanting to combat United States influence. Both Xi and Putin agreed that the U.S. is trying to, quote, "contain the development of our countries." That's what they said, and they want to combat it. Let's go back to November of 2022 when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited China. This is according to the CCP state news network. President Xi underscored the need for China and Germany, two major countries with great influence, to work together in times of change and instability and contribute more to world peace and development. Again, do you notice a pattern here? They're trying to kick out the U.S. and make China the main name in town. And 9 months ago, Xi met with Gustavo Petro, who is the president of Colombia. A state-owned Chinese company is building, you guessed it, a railway line in the capital of Bogota. And when the second Chinese spy balloon traversed over Latin America, the first, of course, traversed over the continental United States until we shot it down a little too late over the coast of South Carolina, a second balloon traversed over South America. When it went over the country of Colombia and Costa Rica, for that matter, neither of the two leaders condemned it or really even responded to it. Why? Because Xi Jinping has deftly come in, industrialized those countries, and has those leaders in his back pocket. And just a few days ago, as I indicated in the introduction, Xi Jinping hosted the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, just to add to the list of world leaders, where actually the French president argued that Europe was too subservient to the United States on China policy. He even said that defending Taiwan may not be in the interest of Europe or in the interest of France, and that Europe should not be, quote, followers of Washington with regard to Taiwan. I can give you more examples that Xi Jinping has recently met with leaders from Spain, Singapore, Malaysia, and the European Commission. I am becoming convinced now more than ever that one of the most important issues on the ballot in 2024, if not the most important issue, is China. We must vote on China. with our leader in 2024. A, because of all of the examples that I just told you of how they are asserting their economic and political influence at unprecedented levels, but also because of the way that China is eating the lunch, as President Joe Biden would say, but he would deny that China is eating our lunch. But in fact, China is eating the lunch of the United States. Some examples I can point to is fentanyl, which is the #1 cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. A size of the grain of sand can kill you. People think that it comes across our border and it originates in Mexico, and it is certainly true that it comes across our southern border, but it does not originate in Mexico or in Latin America. It actually originates in China. China sends the fentanyl to these gangs, drug cartels, which funnel it across our border. That is an act of warfare. Maybe China is not landing planes or sending battalions into United States territory yet, but they are trying to deftly, clandestinely kill American people, and they are succeeding. That is an act of warfare. 120 million Americans who use TikTok and WeChat are spied on by the Chinese Communist Party. Indeed, the CCP brags about how they have, in addition to technological mechanisms of spying on Americans, they have actual spies here in the United States that have been found in our levels of government and at universities such as Harvard. And recently, the Pentagon announced that China has surpassed us in terms of their number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And given that at the 20th Party Congress in October, and as recently as a few weeks ago, Xi Jinping has said that he wants to be the global hegemon, that he wants to move against Taiwan. Indeed, he does not revoke the right to use violent measures to seize Taiwan. We should all be very afraid of what China is doing to the United States and to the world. And the fact also that our president is not responding appropriately to this, indeed denying the grave threat that China poses to us, is just unacceptable and terrifying. Let's listen to what President Joe Biden said at the recent State of the Union on February 7th of this year about China.
Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world.
You can see the sobering look on those members of the military there in the audience. They know just how untrue it is. And really, I would be remiss not to mention the Chinese have bought off the Biden family. This most recently came out during the Hunter Biden laptop story. There were several exchanges between Hunter Biden and his business associates and top CCP-connected officials in which the Bidens were negotiating cuts, some of which went to, quote, the big guy, which Hunter Biden's business partner testified under oath was, in fact, Joe Biden. And it has recently came out that the Penn Biden Center, which was that think tank in Washington, D.C., where the classified documents were discovered, got $900,000 a year in grants from China. And a lot of that money actually went to members of the Biden family, including President Biden's granddaughter and Hunter Biden's daughter, Haley Biden. So yes, indeed, in 2024, we really have to vote on China and put that at the top of the list. Moving on to other news, our Vice President, Kamala Harris, made a surprise visit to an abortion rally this Saturday, actually in this very city of Los Angeles. This comes after the Supreme Court issued a 5-day pause regarding restrictions on the abortion drug mifepristone, which is used in about half of all of the abortions in the United States. And this was after the Department of Justice had requested that the Supreme Court intervene after a Texas judge paused an FDA approval of that drug. So obviously abortion has been a lot in the news recently, and especially with the overturning of Roe versus Wade just a few months ago. And Kamala Harris came to Los Angeles to this abortion rally and said that this is a critical moment in U.S. history where you have to, quote, stand up and fight. Our vice president continued, when you attack the rights of women in America, you are attacking America. We have seen attacks on voting rights, on fundamental rights to love and to marry the people that you love, attacks on the ability of people to be themselves and to be proud of who they are. Let's look at how many lies our vice president espoused in just that one, or I guess 2 sentences. First, this attack on voting rights. What is she talking about? Where? is asking for an ID at the voting booth, when you ask for an ID to buy cigarettes or buy alcohol or get on a plane, an attack on voting rights? No. Attack on a fundamental right to love? We don't have a fundamental right to love. Love is an emotion. It is not a fundamental right that is codified in our Constitution or other statutes. She says, but we have a fundamental right to marry the people that you love. Well, it seems that she is referring to gay marriage. There is no fundamental challenge to gay marriage. There hasn't been a fundamental challenge to gay marriage since 2015, when Obergefell versus Hodges was handed down by the Supreme Court, legalizing gay marriage in all 50 states. There might be a fringe attack or challenge to the idea of a constitutionally approved right for gay couples to marry, just as there are fringe secessionists attacks or proposals. But to say there is a fundamental attack to marry the people that you love, that is a lie. And then finally, attacks on the ability of people to be themselves and be proud of who they are. It seems that she is implying here, or sort of referring to, the push by the right to stop having schools teach young people about gender fluidity, and of course, to stop having hospitals like the Boston Children's Hospital and many other hospitals around the country allow so-called gender-affirming care, which is really just state-sanctioned mutilation of the healthy breast and genital tissue of young children. It seems that that is what she is referring to. But no, there is not an attack on the ability of people to be themselves. Actually, those on the right wing are not saying that people shouldn't be transgender. They are saying that kids are too young to decide whether or not they are transgender. They should wait until they are a certain age in order to make such consequential and permanent decisions about their body. So again, just in these two sentences, it really tells you all that you need to know about this individual, that she lies, as my dear friend Dennis Prager would say, with the ease with which she breathes. Harris also talked about pro-life voices in this country. She said that they, quote, attack fundamental rights, and she claimed that pro-lifers, quote, by extension, attack our democracy. This commentary is not a position on abortion. I have great respect for those who are pro-choice and those who are pro-life, and I understand both positions. Whether or not you agree with the debate about this abortion drug, whether or not you agree with the ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade, I would hope that we all have enough common sense to agree that this is not an attack on our democracy. Indeed, actually, there is nothing in the Constitution that guarantees a right to have an abortion. In the recital of the Constitution, there is something that is codified that guarantees our right to life, which is arguably more of a argument that a pro-life position is more codified in our democracy. But the fact that she is calling political opposition a threat to democracy, again, tells you what you need to know about this individual. One thing that I would like to ask our vice president, and indeed other people in this country who so relentlessly tarnish the character of pro-lifers, I would like to ask, what is a political opposition on this issue that would be acceptable to you? What is it? The whole point of a democracy is to have opposition, to allow different political voices to be espoused. And these individuals claim that they care so much about democracy. Well, a cornerstone of it, again, is allowing diversity of opinion. What kind of political opposition would be acceptable to them? A point of a political opposition is to oppose someone politically, but they don't actually care about having a political opposition. They don't want to have a political opposition. They just want people to endorse whatever position they believe is right. Kamala Harris said, finally, I fundamentally believe that you can gauge the strength of a democracy based on the strength of women in that democracy. While it may behoove her to be reminded that half of the people that pro-lifers seek to protect in the womb are, in fact, women. I just want to highlight for you, by bringing the story to your attention, that the way that we talk about this issue has become so thwarted. It's a sign of our times that we cannot tolerate other people's opinions on issues. Indeed, whether or not you agree with pro-lifers, it is a very dignified, noble thing to want to preserve a life. a voiceless, defenseless thing in the womb. Again, you can politically disagree with that, but that is a very principled position and one that should not be so vilified and tarnished by the highest officials in our country. And to give you a final example of how awful the way that we talk about this issue has become, I've noticed that when people talk about abortion, I even noticed this at my college graduation. We had Jacinda Ardern, who's the former Prime Minister of New Zealand. She was talking about how she had taken legislative steps in her country to codify a woman's right to abortion. I noticed during my graduation that people were standing up and whistling and cheering and smiling as if she had just talked about something happy. Whether or not you are pro-choice, I hope that we can all agree that abortion is a very regrettable thing. It is a very regrettable, scary, unfortunate thing for the woman and the man, the couple that is going through it, and of course, for the child whose life is being lost. This is not something that we should be cheering about. And we saw this recently. I want to play for you a clip of the governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, talking about her gaining access to the abortion drug. Listen to how people in the background respond when she says that.
At my request, the University of Massachusetts Amherst agreed to purchase approximately 15,000 doses of mifepristone. That's enough, that's sufficient to ensure coverage for well over a year.
You can hear her calling pro-lifers extremists, and the people in the background yelling yay that she sees access to an abortion drug is just so sad. Clapping may be appropriate if you agree with the position, but yelling yay for a drug that is going to end the lives of fetuses in the womb, that's nothing to celebrate. Now on to the final story. It has been announced that President Donald Trump has raised more than $34 million for his 2024 re-election campaign since the start of this year. And there was a huge jump in donations after his most recent indictment. He took in, this is according to his campaign, $15 million since the announcement of the charges. Now, I was recently speaking with someone who had a very interesting point that I'd like to share with you. And sort of like the abortion commentary, I'm not taking a position on whether one should vote for Trump or for DeSantis, of course. I'm saying if you're a Republican in 2024. But one of the things here that the left may be trying to do is they may want to push people to Trump because of this indictment. We see that there has been several new polls that have showed that President Trump has come ahead of DeSantis in these election trackers. This one, according to the 2024 GOP primary election tracker, this is Morning Consult's poll, former President Donald Trump has 56% of support among those who were polled, among likely primary voters, whereas DeSantis has 22%. And again, this margin has grown a lot, i.e. Donald Trump has pulled ahead since this indictment. And I'd just like to share with you, because I thought this thought was very interesting, that they may be wanting to push people to Trump. They know that this indictment is political persecution, and they may want more Republican voters to feel a sense of allegiance to Trump and vote for him in the primary so that he is indeed the nominee that is running against President Biden, because the left may think that given that there are so many Republicans and of course non-Republicans that are never Trumpers, that DeSantis may actually stand a better chance to beat Biden. So they may want Trump to be the nominee so that he doesn't beat Biden in 2024. Anyway, it is just very interesting to track the way that this indictment has bumped him, and it shows something that should be encouraging for all of us, that Americans see this for what it really is. As I said, political persecution. And if you want to know more details about the indictment and all of the charges that are phony and why they are phony, you can watch some most recent episodes of Julie Noted, where I go into the statute, I go into the charges and show you what it really is. Thanks for watching today. Again, please be sure to check out my show Timeless and subscribe to this channel by clicking the button down below. Take care, everyone.